Bada booey. Baba booey. Eyo.
Surgery. I've got good news. You probably
Do people usually take long to get here? Depends on the people. Also me fixing my shit, so that way I can, you know, see chat properly. And I did say 6 o'clock. I started early just to give people safe space to come in, and I did link it in the Discord. Unless I did something to piss everybody off. Everyone's watching Smoky Neko. That's not good. I'm not a big content creator like some other people are. I'm relatively a small lad, a small boy, living in a small world, as you would say. I really need to get like a thing for my phone. So that way I could just like hook it up to somewhere. Heyo! So that way like it doesn't fall down. I doubt it. Everyone loves you, boss. Not everyone. Would you believe me if I told you I pissed off quite a few people with the takes that I have? Because, like, there's a lot of people I've pissed off who really hate me. Like, it is obscene with how much hate I get sometimes. From, like, very small people, too. Like, they just get so mad and it's so weird. What? Absolute crazy. I know, right? They get so mad at me, and it's so fucking weird, dude. Like so obscenely weird. I don't get it. Those people clearly don't understand how to be people. They do not. Ironically, most of them don't know how to take a shower, so like I have no idea how anyone couldn't love you. Oh, I make it hard sometimes. I do make it extremely hard sometimes. And we're gonna go live on TikTok because it's story time night, and I'm not gonna leave the poor people on TikTok high and dry. Because we don't do that here at EVIL. We don't do that here in my house. We don't leave people alone. We don't leave them behind. We are always the extending hand when it comes to books. More people need to read. They need to stop reading shit. What is shit? Anything by Andrew Tate, Jordan B. Peterson, Matt Wall, all that kind of stuff. All those garbage people. Don't read their shit. Their shit is garbage. And it deserves to be in the garbage. Boss, do you know the Muffin Man? You mean the man who lives on Drury Lane? Of course I know him. He was a trusted brother, a comrade, a man that I would follow into death, a man I would follow into hell. He was once that man. I would once call him a brother. But after what happened to Humpty Dumpty, it just never was the same. It was like staring into the eyes of a dead man. He wouldn't respond. He just never could recuperate after that. Pushed all of us away. Me, the three pigs, Tinkerbell. We all tried to be there for him. We all tried. But he couldn't lift himself, man. He couldn't do it. Oh, Muffin Man. Why'd you do it? Why did you use Humpty Dumpty's egg? You sick bastard! Rest in peace, my brothers. Rest in peace. Or in Humpty Dumpty's case, rest in pieces. Okay, well, that's enough of that. Hiya, boss. Your sound quality is fantastic tonight. Oh, hopefully it stays that way. I've been recording and doing shit all day. And it's just been... Oh, boy! Why is my desktop audio going off? It shouldn't be going off. Why are you connected to everything and nothing at the same time? I don't want to invite anyone to the live. Why? Guardian Railer. Hello, hello, hello! If y'all want to go sub to my YouTube, I'd appreciate it. I don't know what I walked into, but I'm down for it. Hell yeah. Boss says a lot of sus moments. I'm not sus. I'm extremely stupid, but I'm not sus. I'll tell you that much. Alright. What the fuck are we doing here today? Aside from crying over the corpse of an egg? That is an allegory for something. Hi, Buckcut. We're here to read this. Continue this little ditty of a story. The story of Horus Lupercal and how he went from being the greatest man to the greatest disappointment. I'm not barking for you. I'm sorry. I'm not into that. TikTok can be full of fucking weirdos, dude. So many kinky people just trying to exist in one space. Listen, I understand that you got kinks, but I'm gonna read this, and you can choose to sit there and listen, or you can leave. That's up to you. Woo! Books! Y'all remember the Scholastic Book Fairs? Y'all got your fucking pants drenched in, like, excitement when you heard that, hey kids, we're going to the book fair. We all like went fucking nuts. We all went fucking nuts for the book fair. And it was fantastic every time we went, especially when they were offering video games. I remember when they were offering Creatures from the Krusty Krab. I have it. It's a copy of mine. It's sitting outside my living room. But we are here to read, and I will voice act as best I can to you, because you are my audience and I love you. Also, if you want to support me, go to Patreon and donate and join the Patreon. It's only $5 a month. It's literally nothing. You get to see all my content early. Or if you want to support me in a way that helps me in another way, because I know some of you are poor, don't worry about it. Everybody has financial struggles. Please take care of yourself first. You could subscribe to my YouTube. And that can get us a lot more things. Can we make puns? I promise I won't read them. Yeah, the good old days of book fairs. Yes. Hi, hooligan. All right. So what happened? Thing. What happened? Okay. So Captain Garfield Loken, along with the Luda Wolves and Horus Lupercal, recently conquered a planet and are now dealing with the after effects of conquering said planet, along with Loken dealing with the questions of what we're doing right. He has basically just gotten out of a conversation with like the lead propagandist of the fleet, who basically propagandized him and told him, yeah, no, what we're doing is great because we're right, and we know we're right. But while also saying, like, oh, you can't make that argument. It's a very paradoxical argument. We also know that Loken just got added in to the Primarch's personal group, the Monorable, which is essentially like a group of individuals that Horus looks to for counsel. I.e., there are people that can like either see the flaws in his plan or give their own opinions based on their own wisdom. And Loken was just added to that because when they were conquering this planet, before they tried conquering it, they were trying to do the diplomacy thing, and Loken's predecessor was killed during the diplomacy. So, we now cut back to that. Later on the islet, by the light of the lanterns, they branded Loken's helm above the right eye with the crescent mark of the new moon. This was his badge of office. Aximan's helm bore the brand of the half-moon, Torgon's the gibbous, and Abaddon's the full. The four-stage cycle of a moon was shared between their war gear. So the Mournival was denoted. They sat on the islet, talking and joking, until the sun rose again. They were playing cards on the lawn by the light of the chemical lanterns. The simple game Mercedes had proposed had been long eclipsed by a punitive betting game, suggested by one of the soldiers. Then the iterator, Mehmed, had joined them, and taken great pains to teach him an old version of cups. Mehmed shuffled and dealt the cards with marvelous dexterity. One of the soldiers whistled mockingly. "A real card hand we have here," the officer remarked. "This is an old game," Mehmed said, "which I'm sure you will enjoy. It dates back a long way. Its origins lost in the very beginning of Old Night. I have researched it, and I understand it was popular amongst the people of ancient Mercia, and also the tribes of Frank." He let them play a few dummy hands until they had the way of it, but Mercedes found it hard to remember what spread won over what. In the seventh turn, believing she had the game's measure at last, she discarded a hand which she believed inferior to the cards Mehmed was holding. They're playing poker, by the way. They're just playing poker. So to understand something about the Horus Heresy is that they're going to use a lot of things from our time, like where we are now, and a little bit further. Like they're making reference to like Frank and all that kind of stuff. That's France. They are strictly talking about poker here. No, he smiled. You win. But you have four of a kind again. And he laid out her cards. Even so, you see? She shook her head. It's all too confusing. The suits correspond, he said, as if beginning a lecture, to the layers of society back then. Swords stand for the warrior, aristocracy, cups, or chalices. For ancient priesthood, diamonds or coins. For the merchant classes, a baton, clubs for the working caste. Some of the soldiers grumbled. Stop iterating us, Mercedes said. Sorry, Mehmed grinned. Anyway, you win. I have four alike, but you have an ace. Monarch, Empress, and Knave immonerable. What did you just say? Mercedes Ollerton asked, sitting up. Memorable, Mehmed replied, reshuffling the old square cut cards. It's the old Frank word for the four royal cards. A winning hand. Behind them, away beyond a high wall of hedge invisible in the still night, a flare suddenly banged off and lit the white sky. A winning hand, Mercedes murmured. Coincidence, and something she privately believed in, called fate, had just opened the future up to her. It looked very inviting indeed. Hello, hello. Chapter 5. Peter Ega Momus, Lecto Divinatus, and Malcontent. Peter Egon Momus was doing them a great honor. Peter Egon Momus was deigning to share with them his visions for the new High City. Peter Egon Momus, architect designate for the 63rd Expedition, was unveiling his preparatory ideas for the transformation of the conquered city into a permanent memorial to glory and compliance. The trouble was, Peter Egon Momus was just a figure in the distance, and largely inaudible. In the gathered audience, in the dusty heat, Ignis Carcassy shifted impatiently and craned his neck to see the assembly. The assembly had been gathered in a city square north of the palace. It was just after midday, and the sun was at its zenith, scorching the bare basalt tower yards of the city. Though the high walls around the square offered some shade, the air was oven dry and stiflingly hot. There was a breeze, but even that was heated like exhaust vapor, and it did nothing but stir up fine grit in the air. Powdered dust, the articulate residue of the... I'm struggling to turn a page. Oh, Manwich, thank you for the sub. Great battle was everywhere, hazing the bright air like smoke. Carcassy's throat was arid as a river, ever in drought. Around him, people in the crowd coughed and sneezed. The crowd, 500 strong, had been carefully vetted. 3/4 of them were local dignitaries, grandees, nobles, merchants, members of the overthrown government, representatives of that part of 6319's ruling classes who had pledged compliance to the new order. They had been summoned by invitation so that they might participate, however superficially, in the renewal of their society. The rest were remembrancers. Many of them, like Carcassy, had been granted their first transit permit to the surface, at long last, so they could attend. If this is what he had been waiting for, Carcassy thought, they could keep it. Standing in a crowd kiln while some old fart incoherent noises in the background? The crowd seemed to share his mood. They were hot and despondent. Carcassy saw no smiles on the faces of the invited locals, just hard-drawn looks of the forbearance. The choice between compliance or death didn't make compliance any more pleasurable. I'm going to take this headset off. I don't need it. They were defeated, deprived of their culture and their way of life, facing a future determined by alien minds. They were simply warily enduring the indignity of this period of transition into the Imperium of Man. From time to time, they clapped in the dulcery manner, only when stirred up by the iterators carefully planted in their midst. The crowd had drawn up around the aprons of a metal stage erected for the event. Upon it were arranged hololithic screens and relief models of the city to be, as well as many as the extravagantly complex brass and steel surveying instruments Momus utilized in his work. Geared, spoked, and meticulous, and the instruments suggested to Carcassy's mind devices to torture. Torture was right. Momus, when he could be seen between the heads of the crowd, was a small, trim man with over-dainty mannerisms as he explained his plans. The staff of the iterators on stage with him aimed live pictures close up at relevant areas of the relief models. The image is transferring directly to the screens along the graphic schematics. But the sunlight was too glaring for decent holographic pictures, and the images were milked out and hard to comprehend. Something was wrong with the Vox mic Momus was using too. and what little of his speech came through served only to demonstrate the man had no gift whatsoever for public speaking. Always a heliothotic city, a tribute to the sun above. We may see this afternoon indeed. I'm sure you will have noticed the glory of the light here. A city of light, light out of darkness and noble theme. By which, of course, I mean the light of truth, shining upon the darkness of ignorance. I am much taken with the local photographic technologies I have found here, and intend to incorporate them into the design. Carcassy sighed. He never thought he would find himself wishing for an iterator, but at least those bastards knew how to speak in public. Momus should have left the talking to one of the iterators while he aimed the wretched pictor wand for them. His mind wandered. He looked up at the side walls around them, geometric slabs against the blue sky, baked pink in the sunlight, or smoke black where shadows slanted. He saw the scorch marks and dulted bolt craters that pitted the basalt-like acne. Beyond the walls, the towers of the palace were in worse repair, these plasterworks hanging off like shed snakeskin, their windows like blinded eyes. In a yard to the south of the gathering, a titan of the Mechanicum stood on station, its grim humanoid form rising up over the walls. It stood perfectly still, like a piece of monumental martial statuary, instantly installed. Now that, thought Carcassy, was far more appropriate celebration of glory and compliance. Carcassy stared at the Titan for a little while. He'd never seen anything like it in his life, except in pics. The awesome sight of it almost made the tedious outing worthwhile. The more he stared at it, the more uncomfortable it made him feel. It was so huge, so threatening, and so very still. He knew it could move. He began to wish it would. He found himself yearning for it to suddenly turn its head or take a step, or otherwise rumble into animation. Its immobility was agonizing. Then he began to fear that if it did suddenly move, he would be quite unmanned and might be forced to cry out in involuntary terror and fall to his knees. A burst of clapping made him jump. Momus apparently said something opposite, and the iterators were stirring up the crowd in response. Carcassy slapped his sweaty hands together a few times, obediently. Carcassy was sick of it. He knew he couldn't bear to stand there much longer with a titan staring at him. He took one last look at the stage. Momus was rambling on well into his 50th minute. The only other point of interest to the whole affair, as far as Carcassy was concerned, stood at the back of the podium behind Momus. Two giants in yellow plate. Two noble Astartes from the 7th Legion. The Imperial Fists. The Emperor's Praetorians. They were presumably in attendance to lend Momus an appropriate air of authority. Carcassy guessed the 7th had been chosen over the Luna Wolves because of their noted genius in the arts of fortification and defense. The Imperial Fists were fortress builders, warrior masons who raised such impenetrable redoubts that they could be held for eternity against any enemy. Carcassy smelled the artful handiwork of Imperial propaganda. The architects of war watching over the architect of peace. Carcassy had waited to see if either would speak or come forward to remark upon Momus's plans, but they did not. They stood there, bolters across their broad chests, as static as the unwavering Titan. Carcassy turned away and began to push his way out through the inflexible crowd. He headed towards the rear of the square. Troopers of the Imperial Army had been stationed around at the hem of the crowd as a precaution. They had been required to wear full-dress uniforms, and they were so overheated that their sweaty cheeks were blanked in a sickly green-white. One of them noticed Carcassy moving through the thinnest part of the audience and came over to him. "Where you going, sir?" he asked. "I'm dying of thirst," Carcassy replied. "There will be refreshments, I'm told, after the presentation," the soldier said. His voice caught on the word refreshments, and Carcassy knew there would be none for the common soldiery. "Well, I've had enough," Carcassy said. "It's not over. I've had enough." The soldier frowned. Perspiration beaded at the bridge of his nose, just beneath the rim of his heavy fur shako. His throat and jowls were flushed pink and sheen with sweat. I can't allow you to wander away. Movement is supposed to be restricted to the approvable areas. Carcassy grinned wickedly. And I thought you were here to keep trouble out, not keep us in. The soldier didn't find that funny, or even ironic. We're here to keep you safe, sir, he said. I'd like to see a permit. Carcassy took out his papers. They were an untidy, crumpled bundle, warm and damp from his trouser pocket. Carcassy waited, faintly embarrassed, while the soldier studied them. He had never liked barking up against authority, especially not in front of people, though the back of the crowd didn't seem to be all that interested in the exchange. You're a remembrancer? The soldier asked. Yes, poet, Carcassy added before the inevitable second question got asked. The soldier looked up from the papers into Carcassy's face, as if searching for some essential characteristic of poethood that might be discerned there, comparable to Navigator's third eye or a slave drone serial tattoo. He'd likely never seen a poet before, which was alright, because Carcassy had never seen a Titan before. You should stay here, sir, the soldier said, handing the papers back to Carcassy. But this is pointless, Carcassy said. I've been sent to make a memorial of these events. I can't get close to anything. I can't even hear properly what that fool's got to say. Can you imagine the wrong-hittedness of this? Momus isn't even history. He's just another kind of memorialist. I've been allowed here to remember his remembrance, and I can't even do that properly. I'm so far removed from the things I should be engaging with. I might as well have stayed on Terra and made do with a telescope. The soldier shrugged. He lost the thread of Carcassy's speech early on. You should stay here, sir, for your own safety. I was told the city had been made safe, Carcassy said. We're only a day or two from compliance, aren't we? The soldier leaned forward discreetly, so close that Carcassy could smell the stale odor of garbage the heat was infusing into his breath. Just between us, that's the official line. But there's been troubling insurgents, loyalists. You always get into Conquered City. No matter how clean the victory, the back streets are not secure. Really? They're saying loyalists, it's just discontent, if you ask me. These bastards have a lot at all, and they're not happy about it. Carcassy nodded. Thanks for the tip, he said, and turned back to rejoin the crowd. 5 minutes later, with Momus still droning on and Carcassy close to despair, an elderly noblewoman in the crowd fainted, and there was a small commotion. The soldiers hurried in to take the charge of the situation and carry her to the shade. When the soldier's back was turned, Carcassy took himself out of the square and into the streets beyond. It sucks when your dreams of seeing conquered cities is just, oh god, this is propaganda, isn't it? He walked for a while through empty courts and high-walled streets where shadows pooled like water. The day's heat was still pitiless, but moving around made it more bearable. Periodic breezes gusted down alleyways, but they were not at all relieving. Most were so full of sand and grit that Carcassy had to turn his back to them and close his eyes until they abated. The streets were vacant, except for the occasional figure hunched in the shadows of a doorway, half visible behind broken shutters. He wondered if anybody would respond if he approached them, but he felt reluctant to try. The silence was penetrating, and to break it would have felt improper as a disturbing a morning vigil. He was alone, properly alone for the first time in over a year, and master of his own actions. It felt tremendously liberating. He could go where he pleased and quickly began to exercise that privilege, taking street turns at random, walking where his feet took him for a while. He kept the still unmoving Titan in sight as a point of reference, but it was soon eclipsed by towers and high roofs, so he resigned himself to getting lost. Getting lost would be liberating too. There were always the great towers of the palace. He could follow those back to their roots if necessary. War had ravaged many parts of the city he passed through. Buildings had toppled into white and dusty heaps of slag, or been reduced to their very basements. Others were roofless, or burned out, or wounded in their structures, or simply rendered into facades, their innards blown out, standing like wooden flats on stage scenery. Yay, someone's becoming a 40k lord because of me. Craters and shell holes pockmarked certain pavements of the surface of metalled roads, sometimes forming strange rows and patterns, as if their arrangement was deliberate or concealed by some secret code. Great truths of life and death. There was a smell in the dry, hot air, like burning or blood or odor. Yet none of those things, a mingled scent, an after scent. It wasn't burning he could smell, it was things burnt. It wasn't blood, it was dry residue. It wasn't odor, it was the seeping consequences of sewer systems broken and cracked by bombardment. Many streets had stacks of belongings piled up along the pavement. Furniture, bundles of clothing, kitchenware, a great deal of it was in disrepair and had evidently been recovered from ruined dwellings. Other piles seemed more intact. The items carefully packed in trunks seemed more intact. People were intending to quit the city, and he realized. They had piled up their possessions in readiness while they tried to procure transport, or perhaps the relevant permission from the occupying authorities. Almost every street and yard bore some slogan or other notice upon its walls. All were handwritten in a great variety of styles and degree of calligraphic skill. Some were daubed in pitch, others paint or dye, others chalk or charcoal. The latter, Carcassy reasoned, marks made by the employment of burnt sticks and splinters taken from the ruins. Many were indecipherable or unfathomable. Many were bold, angry graffiti, splenetically cursing the invaders or defiantly announcing a surviving spark of resistance. They called for death, for uprising, for revenge. Gotta stay hydrated. Others were lists carefully recording the names of the citizens who had died in that place, or plaintive requests for news about the missing loved ones listed below. Others were agonized statements of lament, or minutely and delicately transcribed texts of some sacred significance. Carcassy found himself increasingly captivated by them, by the variation and contrast of them, and the emotions they conveyed for the first time, the first true and proper time since he left Terra. He felt the poet in him respond. This feeling excited him. He had begun to fear that he might have accidentally left his poetry behind on Terra in his hurry to embark, or at least that at Malign folded and unpacked, acting as quarters on the ship, like his least favorite shirt. He felt the muse return, and it made him smile. Despite the heat and the mummification of his throat, it seemed apt, after all, that it would be words that brought words back into his mind. He took out his chapbook and his pen. He was a man of tradition, inclinations, believing that no great lyric could ever be composed on the screen of a data slate, a point of variance that had almost got him into a fistfight with Palisade Hadre, the other poet of note amongst the Remembrancer group, that had been near the start of their conveyance to join the expedition, during one of the informal dinners held to allow the Remembrancers to get to know one another. He would have won the fight, if he had come to it. He was fairly sure of that, even though Hadri was an especially large and fierce woman. Oh! He wanted to punch a woman? Okay. Carcassy favored notebooks of thick cream cartridge paper, and at the start of his long, fetid career, had sourced a supplier in one of Terra's Arctic hives, who specialized in antique methods of paper manufacture. The firm was called Bondsman, and it offered a particularly pleasing quarto chapbook of 50 leaves, bound in a case of soft black kid, with an elasticated strap to keep it in a case of to keep it closed. The bondsman, number 7, Evan Carcassy, although raw-headed youth back then, had paid a significant proportion of his first royalty income for an order or 200. Yeah. The volumes had come packed head to toe in a waxed box, lined with tissue paper, which had smelled to him at least of genius and potential. He had used the book sparingly, leaving not one precious page unfilled before starting a new one. As his fame grew and his earnings soared, he had often thought about ordering another box, but always stopped when he realized he had over half the original shipment still up to use. All his great works had been composed upon the pages of Bondsman Number Sevens, his Fanfare to Unity, all 11 of his imperial cantos, his ocean poems, even the meritorious and much republished Reflections and Odes, written in his 30th year, which he had secured in his reputation and won him the epithotic Libriquet. The year before his selection to the role of Remembrancer, after what had been, in all fairness, a decade of unproductive doldrums that had seen him living off of past glories, he had decided to rejuvenate his muse by placing an order for another box. He had been dismayed to discover that Bondsman had ceased operation. Carcassy had 9 unused volumes left in his possession. He had brought all of them with him on the voyage, but for an idiot scribble or two, their pages were unmarked. On a blazing, dusty street corner in the broken city, he took the chapbook out of his coat pocket and slid off the strap. He found his pen, an antique plunger-action fountain, for his traditionalist tastes supplied as much of the means of marking as what should be marked, and began to write. The heat had almost congealed the ink in his nib, but he wrote anyway, copying out much pieces of the wall written as affected him, sometimes attempting to duplicate the manner and form of their delineation. He recorded 1 or 2 at first as he moved from street to street, and then became more inclusive, and began to mark down almost every slogan he saw. It gave him satisfaction and delight to do this. He could feel, quite defiantly, a lyric beginning to form, taking shape from the words he had read and recorded. It would be superlative. After years of absence, the muse had flown back into his soul, as if it had never been away. He realized he had lost track of time. Though it was still stiflingly hot and bright, the hour was late, and the blazing sun had worked its way lower in the sky. He had filled almost 20 pages, half of his chapbook. He had felt sudden pang. What if he had only 9 volumes of genius left in him? What if that box of Bondsman Number 7s delivered so long ago represented the creative limits of his career? He shuddered, chilled despite the clinging heat, and put his chapbook and pen away. He was standing on a lonely, war-scabbed street corner, persecuted by the sun and unable to fathom which direction to turn. For the first time since escaping Peter Egon Mommann's presentation, Carcassy felt afraid. He felt that eyes were watching him from the blind ruins. He began to retrace his steps, slouching through a gritty shadow and dusty light. Only once or twice did a new Il Graffito persuade him to stop and take out the chapbook again. He had been walking for some time in circles, probably for all the streets had begun to look the same, when he found the eating house. It occupied the ground floor and basement of a large basalt tenement, and bore no sign, but the smell of cooking announced its purpose. Door shutters had been opened to the street, and there was a handful of tables set out. For the first time he saw people in numbers, locals in dark-sun cloaks and shawls, as unresponsive and indolent as the few souls he had glimpsed in doorways. They were sitting at the tables under a tattered awning, alone or in small silent groups, drinking thimble glasses of liquor or eating food from finger bowls. Carcassy remembered the state of his throat, and his belly remembered itself with a groan. He walked inside of the shade, nodding politely to the patrons. None responded. In the cold gloom, he found a wooden bar with a dresser behind it, laden with glassware and spouted bottles. The hostel keeper, an old woman in a khaki wrap, eyed him suspiciously from the thriving counter. "Hello," he said. She frowned back. "Do you understand me?" he asked. She nodded slowly. "That's good, that's very good. I've been told our languages were largely the same, but that there were some accent and dialect differences." He trailed off. The woman said something that might have been "what?" or might have been any number of curses or interrogatives. "You have food?" he asked. Then he mimed eating. She continued to stare at him. "Food?" he asked. She replied with a flurry of guttural words, none of which he could make out. Either she didn't have food or was unwilling to serve him. or she didn't have any food for the likes of him. Something to drink, then? He asked. No response. One sec. The cat be screaming at me. You want in? Come in. The cat do scream. He mined drinking, and when that brought nothing, pointed at the bottles behind her. She turned and took down one of the glass containers, selecting one as if he had indicated directly instead of generally. It was 3/4 full of a clear, oily fluid that roiled in the gloom. She thumped it onto the counter and then put a thimble glass beside it. Very good, he smiled. Very, very good. Well done. Is this local? Of course it is. Of course it is. A local specialty? You're not going to tell me, are you? Because you have no idea what I'm actually saying, have you? She stared blankly at him. He picked up the bottle and poured a measure into the glass. The liquor flowed as slowly and heavily through the spout as his ink had done from his pen in the street. He put the bottle down and lifted the glass, toasting her. Your health, he said brightly, and to the prosperity of your world. I know things are hard now, but trust me, this is all for the best. All for the very best. He swigged the drink. It tasted of licorice and went down very well, heating his dry gullet and lighting a buzz in his gut. Excellent, he said, and poured himself a second. Very good indeed. You're not going to answer me, are you? I could ask your name and your lineage and anything at all, and you would just stand there like a statue, wouldn't you? Like a titan. He sank the second glass and poured a third. He felt very good about himself now. Better than he had done for hours. Better even than when the muse had flown back to him in the streets. In truth, drink had always been a more welcome companion to Ignis than any muse, though he would never have been willing to admit it, or to admit the fact that his affection for drink had long weighed down his career, like rocks in a sack. Drink and his muse, both beloved of him, each pulling in opposite directions. He drank his third glass and tipped out a fourth. Warmth infused him, a biological warmth much more welcome than the brutal heat of the day. It made him smile. It revealed to him how extraordinary this false terror was, how complex and intoxicating. He felt love for it and pity and tremendous goodwill. This world, this place, this hostelry would not be forgotten. Suddenly remembering something else, he apologized to the old woman who had remained facing him across the counter like a fugued servitor and reached into his pocket. He had currency, imperial coin, and plastic wafers. He made a pile of them on the stained and glossy bar top. Imperial, he said, but you take that. I mean, you're obliged to. I was told by the iterators this morning imperial currency is legal tender now, to replace your local coin. Terror, you don't know what I'm saying, do you? How much do I owe you? No answer. He slipped his fourth drink and pushed the pile of cash towards her. You decide then. You tell me. Take for the whole bottle. He tapped his finger against the side of the flask. The whole bottle. How much? He grinned and nodded at the money. The old woman looked at the heap, reached out a bony hand, and picked up a 5 aquila piece. She studied it for a moment, then spat on it and threw it at Carcassy. The coin bounced off his belly and fell to the floor. Carcassy blinked and then laughed. The laughter boomed out of him, hard and joyous, and he was quite unable to keep it in. The old woman stared at him, her eyes widened ever so slightly. Carcassy lifted up the bottle and the glass. I'll tell you what, he said. Keep all of it! All of it! He walked away and found an empty table in the corner of the place. He sat down and poured another drink, looking about him. Some of the silent patrons were staring at him. He nodded back cheerfully. Then they looked so human, he thought, and realized it was a ridiculous thing to think, because they were without a doubt human, but at the same time they weren't. Their drab clothes, their drab manner, the set of their features, their way of sitting and looking and eating, they seemed a little like animals, man-shaped creatures, trained to ape human behavior, yet not quite accomplished in that art. Is that what 5,000 years of separation does to a species? He asked aloud. No one answered, and some of his watchers turned away. Was that what 5,000 years did to the divided branches of mankind? He took another sip. Biologically identical, but for a few strands of genetic inheritance, and yet culturally grown so far apart. These were men who lived and walked and drank and shat just as he did. They lived in houses and raised cities, and wrote upon walls and even spoke the same language, old woman notwithstanding. Yet time and division had grown them along an alternate path. Carcassy saw that clearly now. They were a gaff from the rootstock, grown under another sun. Similar yet alien. Even the way they sat at tables and sipped at drinks. Carcassy stood up suddenly. The muse had abruptly jostled the pleasure to drink out in the summit of his mind. He bowed to the old woman as he collected up his glass and two-thirds empty bottle and said, "My thanks, madam." Then he teetered back out into the sunlight. This man has barely been on the planet for 24 hours and he's got himself fucking wasted. Holy fuck, Ignis. He found a vacant of a few streets, away that had been leveled to rubble by bombing, and perched himself on a chunk of basalt. Setting down the bottle of the glass carefully, he took out his half-filled bondsman number 7 and began to write again, forming the first few stanzas of a lyric that owed much to the writings on the walls and the insight he had garnered in Hulstery. It flowed well for a while, and then dried up. He took another drink, trying to restart his inner voice. Tiny, black, ant-like insects milled industriously in the rubble around him, as if trying to rebuild their own miniature lost city. He had to brush one off the open page of his chapbook. Others raced exploratively over the toe caps of his boots in a frenetic expedition. He stood up, imagining and decided this wasn't a place to sit. He gathered up his bottle and his glass, taking another sip. Once he fished out the ant floating in it with his finger. A building of considerable size and magnificence faced him across the damaged lot. He wondered what it was. He stumbled over to the rubble towards it, almost losing his footing on the loose rocks from time to time. What was it? A municipal hall? A library? A school? He wandered around it, admiring the fine rise of the walls and the decorated headers of the stonework. Whatever it was, the building was important. Miraculously, it had been spared the destruction visited on its neighboring lots. Carcassy found the entrance, a towering arch of stone filled with copper doors. They weren't locked. He pushed his way in. The interior of the building was so profoundly and refreshingly cool, it almost made him gasp. It was a single space, an arched roof raised on massive outslight pillars, the floor dressed in cold onyx. Under the end windows, some kind of stone structure rose. Carcassy paused. He put down his bottle beside the base of one of the pillars and advanced down the center of the building with his glass in his hand. He knew there was a word for a place like this. He searched for it. Sunlight filleted the colored glass, slanted through the thin windows. The stone structure at the end of the chamber was carved lectern supporting a very massive and very old book. Carcassy touched the crinkled parchment of the book, opened pages with delight. It appalled to him the same way as the pages. It appealed to him. It appealed to him. My bad. It appealed to him the same way as the pages of a bondsman number 7 did. The sheets were old and faded, covered with ornate black script and hand-colored images. This was an altar, he realized. This place is a temple. A fane! Terror alive, he declared, and then winced as his words echoed back down the cool vault. History had taught him about fanes and religious belief, but he had never before set foot inside such a place of spirits and divinity. He sensed that the spirits were looking down on his intrusion with disapproval, and then laughed at his own idiocy. There were no spirits, not anywhere in the cosmos. Imperial truth had taught him that. The only spirits in this building were the ones in his glass and his belly. He looked at the pages again. Here was the truth of it. The crucial mark of difference between his breed of man and the local variety. They were heathens. They continued to embrace the superstition that the fundamental strand of mankind had set aside. Here was the promise of an afterlife and an ethereal world. Here was the nonsense of a faith in his intangible. Carcassy knew that there were many perhaps amongst the population of a compliant Imperium, who had longed for a return to those ways. God, in every incarnation and pantheon, was long perished, but still men hankered after the ineffable. Despite prosecution, new credos and building religions were sprouting up amongst the cultures of ununified man. Most vigorous of all was the imperial creed that insisted humanity adopt the emperor as a divine god, a god emperor of mankind. The idea was ludicrous and officially heretical. The emperor had always refused such adoration in the most stringent terms, denying his apotheosis. Some said it would only happen after his death, and he was functionally immortal. That tended to cap the argument. Whatever his powers, whatever his capacity, whatever his magnificence as the finest and most gloriously total leader of the species, he was still just a man. The emperor liked to remind mankind of this whenever he could. It was an edict that rattled around the bureaucratic cities of the expanding Imperium. The emperor is the emperor, and he is great and everlasting. But he is not a god, and he refuses any worship offered to him. Yet he just worshipped him right there. Fucking asshole. Carcassy took a swig and put his empty thimble glass down at the angle of the edge of the lectern shelf. The Lectitu Divinatis. That's what it was called. The missile of the underground wellspring that strove, in secret, to establish the cult of the emperor against his will. It was said that even some of the upstanding members of the Council of Terra supported its aims. The emperor as God. Carcassy stifled a laugh. 5,000 years of blood, war, and fire to expunge the gods from the culture, and now the man who achieved that goal supplants them as a new deity? How foolish is mankind, Carcassy laughed, enjoying the way his words echoed around the empty fane. How desperate and flailing. Is it that we simple need a concept of God to fulfill us? Is that part of our makeup? He fell silent, considering the point he had raised to himself. A good point. Well reasoned. He wondered where his bottle had gone. It was a good point. Maybe that was mankind's ultimate weakness. Maybe it was one of humanity's basic impulses. The need to believe in another, higher order. Perhaps faith was like a vacuum, sucking up credulity in frantic effort to fill its own void. Perhaps it was part of mankind's genetic character to need, to hunger for a spiritual solace. Perhaps we are cursed, Carcassy told the empty fane, to create something which does not exist. There are no gods, no spirits, no demons, so we make them up, to comfort ourselves. The fane seemed oblivious to his ramblings. He took hold of his empty glass and wandered back to where he had left the bottle. Another drink. He left the fane and threaded his way into the blinding sunlight. The heat was so intense that he had taken another swig. Carcassy wobbled down a few streets away from the temple and heard a rushing, roasting noise. He discovered a team of Imperial soldiers stripped to the waist, using a flamer to erase anti-Imperial slogans from a wall. They had evidently been working their way down the street, for all the walls displayed swaths of heat burns. "Don't do that!" he said. The soldiers turned and looked at them, their flamer spitting from its garments and demeanor. He was unmistakably not a local. "Don't do that!" he said again. "Orders, sir," said one of the troopers. "What are you doing out here?" another asked. Carcassy shook his head and left them alone. He trudged through narrow alleys and open courts, sipping from the spout of the bottle. He found another vacant lot very similar to the one he had sat down in before, and placed his rump upon a scalen block of basalt. He took out his chapbook and ran through the stanzas that he had written. They were terrible. He groaned as he read them. They then became angry and tore the precious page out. He balled the thick cream paper and tossed it into the rubble. Carcassy suddenly became aware that eyes were staring at him from the shadows of doorways and windows. He could still barely make out their shapes, but knew full well that the locals were watching him. He got up and quickly retrieved the balls of crumpled paper he had discarded, feeling that he had no right to add in any way to the mess. He began to hurry down the street as thin boys emerged from hiding to lob stones and jeers after him. He found himself unexpectedly in the street of the Hulsterly again. It was uninhabited, but he was pleased to find it out as his bottle had become unaccountably empty. He went to the gloom. There was no one around. Even the old woman had disappeared. His pile of imperial currency lay where he had left it on the counter. Seeing it, he felt authorized to help himself to another bottle from behind the bar. Clutching the bottle in his hand, he very carefully sat down one of the tables and poured another drink. He had been sitting there for an indefinite amount of time when a voice asked him if he was all right. Ignis Carcassy blinked and looked up. The gang of Imperial army troopers who had been burning clean the walls of the city had entered the Hulsterly, and the old woman had reappeared to fetch them drinks and food. The officer looked down at Carcassy and his men took their seats. You were right, sir, he asked. Yes, Carcassy slurred. You don't look all right. Pardon me for saying, should you be out in the city? Carcassy nodded furiously, tucking into his pocket for his permit. It wasn't there. I meant to be here, he said instead. Meant to. I was ordered to come. To hear Eater Peton Momus... Shit, no, that's wrong. To hear Peter Egon Momus present his plans for the new city. That's why I'm here. I meant to be. The officer regarded him cautiously. If you say so, sir. They say Momus had drawn up a wonderful scheme for the reconstruction. Oh, yes, quite wonderful, Carcassy replied, reaching for his bottle and missing. Quite bloody wonderful. An eternal memorial to our victory here. Sir? It won't last, Carcassy said. No, it won't last. It can't. Nothing lasts. You look like a wise man to me, friend. What do you think? I think you should be on your way, sir, the officer said gently. No. About this city! This city! It won't last! Terror take Peter Egon Momus to the dust! All things return. As far as I can see, this city was pretty wonderful before we came and hobbled it. Sir, I think... No, you don't, Carcassy said, shaking his head. You don't, and no one does. This city was supposed to last forever, but we broke it, and it laid in tatters. Let Momus rebuild it. It will happen again and again. The work of man is destined to perish. Momus said he plans a city that will celebrate mankind forever. You know what? I bet that's what the architects who built this city thought too. Sir, what man does come apart eventually? You mark my words. This city, Momus' city, the Imperium... Sir, you... Carcassy rose to his feet, blinking and wagging a finger. Don't sir me! The Imperium will fall asunder as soon as we construct it. You'll mark my words. It's an inevitable as... Pain abruptly splintered Carcassy's face, and he fell down, bewildered. He registered a frenzy of shouting and movement, then felt boots and fists slamming into him over and over again. Enraged by his words, the troopers had fallen upon him. Shouting, the officer tried to pull them off. Bones snapped. Blood spurted from Carcassy's nostrils. Mark my words! Nothing we build will last forever! You ask these bloody locals! A boot cap cracked into his sternum. Bloody fluid washed out from his gut. Washed into his mouth. Get off of him! Get off of him! The officer was yelling, trying to rein his provoked and angry men. By the time he managed to do so, Ignis Carcassy was no longer pontificating or breathing. This entire chapter is from the perspective of a man who realizes that the Imperium is fucked. This entire chapter Chapter 5 of Horus Rising is basically saying the Imperium is fucked. The Imperium will always be fucked. Empires like the Imperium do not last. Fascist empires like the Imperium do not last at all. They will inevitably come crumbling down among them. And whenever someone says the Imperium is like the greatest society, point to Chapter 5 in Horus Rising. It took one guy going into a ruined city to realize, wow, we kind of fucking suck. It is really good. It is so good. What's your opinion on Perturabo? I just listened to that. It's ridiculous. Oh, I agree with him wholeheartedly. He's a fucking incel. Perturabo's a fucking incel. It's great. 6. Council. A question well answered. 2 gods in 1 room. Torgodon was waiting for him in the towering antehall behind the Strategium. There you are, he grinned. Here I am, Loken agreed. There will be a question, Torgodon remarked, keeping his voice low. It will seem a minor thing, and will not be obviously directed to you, but be ready to catch it. Me? No, I was talking to myself. Yes, you, Garviel! Consider it a baptismal test. Come on. Loken didn't like the sound of Torgodon's words, but he appreciated the warning. He followed Torgodon down the length of the antehall. It was perilously tall, narrow-placed, with embossed columns of wood set into the walls that soared up and branched like carved trees to support a glass roof 200 meters above them, through which the stars could be seen. Dark wood panels cased the walls beneath the columns, and they were covered with millions of lines of hand-painted names and numbers, all rendered in exquisite gilt lettering. They were the names of the dead, all those of the legions, the army, the fleet, and the Divisio Militaris, who had fallen since the start of the Great Crusade, and actions where this flagship vessel had been present. The names of immortal heroes were lined here on the walls, grouped in columns below header legends that proclaimed the world sites of famous actions and hallowed conquests. From this display, the antehall earned its particular name, the Avenue of Glory and Lament. The walls of fully 2/3 of the antehall were filled up with golden names, as the 2 striding captains in their glossy white plate drew closer to the Strategium end. The wall boards became bare, unoccupied. They passed a group of hooded necrologists, huddled by the last, half-filled panel, who were carefully stenciling new names onto the dark wood with gold-dipped brushes. The latest dead. The roll call came from the High City battle. The necrologists stopped work and bowed their heads as the 2 captains went by. Torgodon didn't spare them a second glance, but Loken turned to read the half-written names. Some of them were brothers from Locuste he would never see again. He could smell the tangy oil suspension of the gold leaf the necrologists were using. Keep up, Torgodon grunted. High door, lacquered gold and crimson, stood closed at the end of the Avenue Hall. Before them, Axeman and Abaddon were waiting. They were likewise fully armored, their heads bare, their brush-crested helms held under their left arms. Abaddon's great white shoulder plates were draped with a black wolf pelt. Garviel, he smiled. Oh, it doesn't do him to keep him waiting, Axeman grumbled. Loken wasn't sure if Little Horus meant Abaddon or the commander. What were you 2 gabbing about, like fishwives, the pair of you? I was just asking if he'd settled Vipus in, Torgodon said simply. Axeman glanced at Loken, his wide-set eyes unguidedly half-hooded by his lids. And I was reassuring Tarek that I had, Loken added. Evidently, Torgon's quiet heads-up had been for his ears only. Let's enter, Abaddon said. He raised his gloved hand and pushed the gold and crimson doors wide. A short processional lay before them, a 20-meter colonnade of ebon stone chased with a fretwork of silver wire. It was lined by 40 guardsmen of the Imperial Army, members of Barbarus's own Byzant Janissaries, 20 against each wall. They were splendidly appointed in full dress uniforms. Oh, it's Barbarus. Okay, sorry, my bad. Long cream greatcoats with gold froggings, high-crowned chrome helms with basket visors and scarlet cockades, and matching sashes. As the Montrevel came through the doors, the Janissaries brandished their ornate power lances, beginning with the pair directly inside the doorway. The polished blades of the weapons whirled up into place in series like chasing dominoes along the processional, each facing pair of weapons locking into position just before the marching captain caught up with the ripple. The final pair came to salute eyes front in perfect discipline, and the Montrevel stepped past them onto the deck of the Strategium. The Strategium was a great semicircular platform that projected like a lip above the tiered theater of the flagship's bridge, far below the principal command level, thronging with hundreds of uniformed personnel and burnished aid servitors, tiny as ants, to either side. I need a drink. My God, this is a lot of words. That's a lot of words! Jesus Christ! To either side, the beehive subdecks of the secondary platforms, dressed in gold and black ironwork, rose up past the levels of the projecting Strategium, up into the roof itself. Each story busy with Navy staff operators, cogitation officers, and astropaths. The front section of the bridge chamber was a great strutted window, through which the constellations and the ink of space could be witnessed. The standards of the Luna Wolves and the Imperial Fists hung from the arching roof. Either side of the staring eye banner of the War Master himself, the great banner was marked in golden thread with the decree, "I am the Emperor's vigilance and the Eye of Terra." Loken remembered the award of that august symbol with pride during the great triumph after Olenor was done. In all his decades of service, Loken had only been on the bridge of the Vengeful Spirit twice before. Once for formally accept his promotion to captain, and then again to mark his elevation to the captaincy of the 10th. The scale of the place took his breath away, as it had done both times before. The Strategium deck itself was an ironwork platform which supported, or as its center, a circular dais of plain, unfinished oscillate, 1 meter deep and 10 in diameter. The commander had always eschewed any form of throne or seat. The ironwork walk space around the dais was half shadowed by the overhang of tiered galleries that climbed the slopes of the chamber behind it. Glancing up, Loken saw huddles of senior iterators, tacticians, ship captains, and expedition fleet, and other notable gatherings to view the proceedings. He looked for Cinderman, but couldn't find his face. Several attendant figures stood quietly around the edge of the dais. Lord Commander Hector Barbarus, Marshal of the Expedition Army, a tall, precise aristocrat in red robes, stood discussing the content of a data slate with 2 formally uniformed army aides. Boas Comensis, master of the fleet, waited, drumming steel fingers on the edge of the Alslith plint. He was a square bear of a man, his ancient flaccid body encased in a superb silver and steel exoskeleton, further draped in robes of deep, rich Celtic blue. Neatly machined ocular lenses whirred and exchanged in the augmented frame that supplanted his long, dead eyes. Ingmei Singh, the expedition's mistress of astropathy, stood to the master's left, a gaunt, blind spectre in a hooded white gown, and round from her in order, the high senior of the Navis Nobilite, Navigator Chorogas, the master companion of Vox, the master companion of Lucidation, the senior Tacticae, the senior Heraldists, and various gubernational legates. Each one, Loken noticed, had placed a single personal item on the edge of the dais where they stood. A glove, a cap, a wand stave. We stay in the shadows, Torgon told him, bringing Loken up short under the edge of the shade cast by the balcony above. This is the Monorval's place. Apart, yet present. Loken nodded and remained with Torgon and Aximand in the symbolic shadow of the overhang. Abaddon stepped forward in the light and took his place at the edge of the dais between Vivarus, who nodded pleasantly to him, and Camonis, who didn't. Abaddon placed his helm upon the edge of the outslight disc. An item placed on the dais registers a desire to be heard and noted, Torgon told Loken. Ezekiel has a place by dint of his status as first captain. For now. He will speak as first captain, not as the Monorval. Will I get to hang on this ever? Loken asked. Not at all, Torgon said. Then he grinned. Yes, you will. Of course you will. Loken noticed another figure, removed from the main assembly. The man, if it were a man, lurked at the rail of the Strategium deck, gazing out across the chasm of the bridge. He was a machine. It seemed much more a machine than man. Vague relics of flesh and muscle remained in the skeletal fabric of his mechanical body, a fabulously wrought armature of gold and steel. Who is that? Loken whispered. Regulus, Aximand replied curtly, an adept of the Mechanicum. So that was a Mechanicum adept, looked like, Loken thought. That was the sort of being who could command the invincible titans into war. Hush now, Torgon said, tapping Loken on the arm. Plated glass doors on either side of the platform slid open, and laughter boomed out. A huge figure came out of the Strategium, talking and laughing animately along the diminutive presence who scuttled to keep up. Everybody dropped in bow, Loken going down on one knee, could hear the rustle of others bowing in the steep balconies above him. Boas Kamenis did so slowly because his exoskeleton was ancient. Adept Regulus did so slowly, not because his machine body was stiff, but rather because he was clearly reluctant. War Master Horus looked around, smiled, and then leapt up onto the dais in a single bound. He stood at the center of the outslight disc and turned slowly. My friends, he said, honor's done, up you get! Slowly they rose and beheld him. He was as magnificent as ever, Loken thought. Massive and limber, a demigod manifest, wrapped in white gold armor and pelts of fur. His head was bare, shaven, sculptural. His face was noble, deeply tanned by multiple sunlights, his wide-spaced eyes bright, his teeth gleaming. He smiled and nodded to each and every one of them. He had such vitality, like a force of nature. A tornado, a tempest, an avalanche, trapped in humanoid form and distilled. The potential locked in. He rotated slowly on the dais, grinning, nodding to some, pointing out certain friends with a familiar laugh. The Primarch looked at Loken, back in the shadows of the overhang, and his smile seemed to broaden for a second. Loken felt a shudder of fear. It was pleasant and vigorous. Only the Wardmaster could make an Astartes feel that. Friends, Horus said. His voice was like honey, like steel, like a whisper, like all those things mixed as one. My dear friends, the comrades of the 63rd Expedition. Is it really that time again? Laughter rippled around the deck and from the galleries above. Briefing time, Horus chuckled. And I salute you, all for coming here to bear the tedium of yet another session. I promise I'll keep you no longer than is necessary. First, though, Horus jumped back down off the dais and stooped to place a sheltering arm around the tiny shoulders of a man who had accompanied him from the inner chamber, like a father showing off a small child to his brothers. So embraced, the man fixed a stiff, sickly grin upon his face, more a desperate grimace than a show of pleasure. Before we begin, Horus said, I want to talk about my good friend Peter Aegon Momomus here. How I deserved, pardon me, how humanity deserved an architect as fine and as gifted as this. I don't know. Peter has been telling me about his designs of the new High City here, and they are wonderful, wonderful, wonderful! Really, I don't know, my lord, Mummus as Harmt, his rictus trembling. The architect's designate was beginning to shake, and during direct exposure to such supreme attention, our lord the emperor himself sent Peter to us, Horus told him. He knew his worth. You see, I don't want to conquer. Conquest of itself is so messy, isn't it, Ezekiel? Yes, lord, Abaddon murmured. How can we draw the last outposts of man back into one harmonious whole if all we bring them is conquest? We are duty-bound to leave them better than we found them, enlightened by the communication of the imperial truth, and dazzling made over as august provinces of our wide estate. This expedition and all expeditions must look to the future and be mindful that what we leave in our wake must stand as an enduring statement of our intent, especially upon worlds as here, where we have been forced to inflict damage in promulgation of our message. We must leave legacies behind us, imperial cities, monuments to the new age, and fitting memorials to those who have fallen in the struggle to establish it. Peter, my friend Peter here, understands this. I urge you all to take the time to visit his workshops and review his marvelous schemes. And I look forward to seeing the genius of his visions, gracing all the new cities we build in the course of our crusade. Applause broke out. All the new cities? It is, Momus coughed. Peter is the man for the job, Horus cried, ignoring the architect's muted gasp. I am at one with the way he perceives architecture, a celebration he understands like no other. I believe how the spirit of the crusade may be realized in steel and glass and stone. What we raise up is far more important than what we strike down. What we leave behind us, men must admire for eternity and say, this was well done indeed. This is what the Imperium means. And without it, we would be shadows. For that, Peter's our man. Let's laud him now! A huge explosion of applause rang out across the vast chamber. Many officers and command tiers below joined in. Peter Egamamomus looked slightly glazed as he was led off the strategium by an aide. Horus leapt back onto the dais. Let's begin. And my worthy adept? Regulus stepped towards the edge of the dais and put a polished machine cog down delicately on the lip of the outslight. When he spoke, his voice was augmented and human, like an electric wind brushing through the boughs of steel trees. My Lord Warmaster, the Mechanicum is satisfied with this rock. We continue to study with great interest the technologies captured here. The gravitic and phasic weapons are being reverse engineered in our forges, and last report, 3 standard template construct patterns previously unknown to us have been recovered. Horus clapped his hands together. Glory to our brothers of the tireless Mechanicum! Slowly we piece together the missing parts of humanity's knowledge. The Emperor will be delighted as will, I'm sure, your Martian lords. Regulus nodded, lifting up the cog and stepping back from the dais. Horus looked around. Rackus, my dear Rackus. Lord Governor-elect Rackus, a portly man in dove gray robes, had already placed his scepter wand on the edge of the dais to mark his participation. Now he fiddled with it as he made his report. Horus heard him out patiently, nodding encouragingly from time to time. Rackus droned on, an unnecessary length. Loken felt sorry for him. One of the Lord Commander Varvas's generals, Rackus had been selected to remain at 6319 as Governor Overseer, marshalling the occupation forces of the world transmuted into a full imperial state. Rackus was a career soldier, and it was clear that though he took his election as a signal of honor, he was quite aghast at the prospect of being left behind. He looked pale and ill, brooding on the time not long away when the expedition fleet left him to manage the work alone. Rachis was Terranborn, and Loken knew that once the fleet sailed on and left him to finish the job, Rachis would feel as abandoned as if he had been marooned. A governorship was intended to be the ultimate reward for war hero service, but it seemed to Loken a quietly terrible fate to be monarch of a world and then cast away upon it forever. The crusade would not be back to visit conquered worlds in a hurry. In my truth, Commander, Rachis was saying, it may be many decades until this world achieves a state of equity with the Imperium. There is great opposition. How far are we from compliance? Horus asked, looking around. Vivarus replied, True compliance, Lord, decades. As my good friend Rachis says, functional compliance, well, that is different. There is a seed of dissidence in the southern hemisphere that we cannot quench. Until that is brought into line, this world cannot be certified. Horus nodded. So we stay here if we must until the job is done. We must hold over our plans to advance. Such a shame. The Primarch's smile faded for a second as he pondered. Unless there is another suggestion. He looked at Abaddon and let the words hang. Abaddon seemed to hesitate and glanced quickly back to the shadows behind him. Loken realized that this was the question. This was a moment of counsel when the Primarch looked outside the official hierarchy of the expedition's command echelon for the informal advice of his chosen inner circle. Torgon nudged Loken, but the nudge was unnecessary. Loken had already stepped forward into the light behind Abaddon. My Lord Warmaster, Loken said, almost startled by the sound of his own voice. Captain Loken! Loken, Horus said with a delighted flash of his eyes. The thoughts of the Vulnerable are always welcomed at my council. Several present, including Vivarus, made approving sounds. My lord, the initial phase of the war here was undertaken quickly and cleanly, Loken said. A surgical strike by the spear tip against the enemy's head to minimize the loss and hardship that both sides would suffer in a longer full-scale offensive. A guerrilla war against insurgents would inevitably be arduous, drawn-out, costly affair. It could last for years without resolution, eroding Lord Commander Vivarus' precious army resources and blighting any good beginning in the Lord Governor-elect's rule. 6319 cannot afford it, and neither can the expedition. I say, and if I speak out of turn, forgive me. I say that if the spear tip was meant to conquer the world in one clean blow, it has failed. The work is not yet done. Order the Legion to finish the job. Murmuring sprang up all around. You'd have me unleash the Luna Wolves again, Captain? And Horus asked. Loken shook his head. Not the Legion as a whole, sir. 10th Company. We were the first in, and for what we have been praised, but the praise was not deserved, for the job is not done. Horus nodded, as if quite taken with this. Vivarus? The army always welcomes the support of the noble legion. The insurgent factions might plague my men for months, as the captain rightly points out, and make a great tally of killing before they are done with. A company of Luna Wolves could crush them utterly and end the mutiny. Rachis? An expedient solution would be a weight off my back, sir, Rachis said. He smiled. It would be a hammer to crush a nut, perhaps, but it would be empathetic. The work would be done, and quickly. First, Captain. The Vulnerable speaks with one voice, Lord, Abaddon said. I urge for a swift conclusion to our business here, so that 6319 can get on with its life, and we can get on with the crusade. So it shall be, Horus said, smiling broadly again. So I make command of it. Captain, have 10th Company drawn ready and oath to the moment. We will make a... We will anticipate news of your success eagerly. Thank you for speaking your mind plainly and for cutting to the quick of the thorny problem. There was a firm flutter of approving applause. Then possibilities open for us after all, Horus said. We can begin to prepare for the next phase, when I signal him. Horus looked at the blind mistress of astropaths, who nodded silently. Our beloved Emperor will be delighted to learn that our portion of the crusade is about to advance again. We should now discuss the options open to us. I thought to brief you on our findings concerning these myself, but there is another who positively insists he is fit to do it himself. Yeah. Ah! I'm sorry. This is a lot of reading, and voices take a lot out of me. Everyone present turned to look at the plate glass door slid open a second time. The Primarch began to clap, and the applause gathered and swept around the galleries as Malachhurst limped out onto the stage of the Strategium. It was the Equerry's first formal appearance since his recovery from the surface. Malachhurst was a veteran Luna Wolf, and a son of Horus to boot. He had been in his time a company captain, and might have risen to the first captaincy, had he not been promoted to the office of Equerry. A shrewd and experienced soul, Malachhurst's talent for Malachhurst's talents for intrigue and intelligence ideally served him in the role, and had long since earned him the title Twisted. He had long since earned the title Twisted. He took no shame in this. The Legion might protect the War Master physically, but he protected him politically. Guiding and advising, blocking and outplaying, aware and perfectly sensitive to every nuance current in the expedition's hierarchy. He had never been well liked, for he was a hard man to get close to, even by the intimidating standards of the Astartes, and he had never made any particular effort to be liked. Most thought of him as a neutral power, a facilitator loyal only to Horus himself. No one was ever foolish enough to underestimate him. But circumstance had suddenly made him popular. Beloved, almost. Believed dead, he had been found alive, and in the light of Serjanus' death, this had been taken as some compensation. The work of the remembered Sir Euphrates Keeler had cemented his new role as the noble, wounded hero as the pics of his unexpected rescue had flashed around the fleet. Now the assembly welcomed him back rapturously, cheering his fortitude and resolve. He had been reinvented through misfortune into the adored hero. Loken was quite sure Malachhurst was aware of this ironic turn, and fully prepared to make the most of it. Malachhurst came into the open. His injuries had been so severe that he was not yet able to clothe himself in the armor of the Legion, and wore instead a white robe with the wolf's head emblem embroidered on the back. A gold signet in the shape of the War Master's icon, the staring eye formed the cloak's clasp around his throat. He limped and walked with the aid of a metal staff. His back bulged with a kyphoptic misalignment. His face, drawn thin and pale since last it had been seen, was lined with effort and waiting on synthetic skin gel, covered gashes upon his throat and the left side of his head. Loken was shocked to see that he was now truly twisted. The old mocking nickname suddenly seemed crass and indelicate. Horus got down off the dais and threw his arms around his equerry. Bavaris and Abaddon both went over to greet him with warm embraces. Malachhurst smiled and nodded to them, then nodded and waved up to the galleries around to acknowledge the welcome. As the applause abated, Malachhurst leaned heavily against the side of the dais and placed his staff upon it, in the ceremonial manner. Instead of returning to his place, the War Master stood back, away from the circle, giving his equerry center stage. I have enjoyed, Malachhurst began, his voice hard, but brittle with effort, a certain luxury of relaxation in these last few days. Laughter rattled from all sides, and the clapping resumed for a moment. Bed rest, Malachhurst went on, that bane of a warrior's life, has suited me well. It had given me ample opportunity to review the intelligence gathered in these last few months by our advanced scouts. However, bed rest, as a thing to be enjoyed, has its limits. I insisted that I be allowed to present this evidence to you today. For Emperor bless me, never in my dreams did I imagine I would die of inaction. More approving laughter. Loken smiled. Malachus really was making the best use of his new stats amongst them. He was almost likable. To review, Malachus said, taking out a control wand and gesturing with it briefly. 3 key areas of interest to us are at this juncture. His gesture activated the underdeck hololithic projectors in shapes of solid light came into being above the strategium, projected so that all the galleries could see them. The first was the rotating image of the world they orbited, surrounded by graphic indicators of elliptical alignment and precision. The spinning world shrank rapidly until it became part of a system arrangement, similarly draped in the schematic overlays. A turning 3-dimensional orrery suspended in the air. Then, too, that shrank and became a small, highlighted component in a mosaic of stars. First, Malachar said, this area here. Intimized 85817, the cluster adjacent to our current locale. A particular stellar neighborhood of the light map glowed. Our most obvious and accessible next port of call. Scout ships report 18 systems of interest, 12 of which promise fundamental worth in terms of elemental resource, but no signs of life or habitation. The searches are not yet conclusive, but as this early juncture might I be so bold as to suggest that this region need not concern the expedition. Subject to certification, these systems should be added to the manifest of the colonial pioneers who will follow in our footsteps. He waved the wand again, and a different group of stars lit up. This second region, estimated as... Master. Boa Commendus cleared his throat and obligingly said, 9 weeks standard travel time to Spinwood or us Equerry. 9 weeks to Spinwood, thank you! Malachus replied, we have barely begun to scout this district, but there are clearly indications that some significant cultures or cultures of interstellar capability exist within its bounds. Currently functioning? Abaddon asked. Too often Imperial expeditions came upon dry traces of long-perished societies in the deserts of stars. Too early to tell, First Captain, Malachus said, though the scouts report some discovered relics bear similarities to those we found on 7315 half a decade ago. So not human, Adept Regulus asked. Too early to tell, sir, Malachus repeated. The region has its intermission code, but I believe you'll be interested to hear that it bears an old Terran name. Sagittarius. The dreadful Sagittary, Horus whispered with a delighted grin. Quite so, my lord. The region certainly requires further examination. The crippled equerry moved the wand again and brought up a third coil of suns. Our third option further to Spinward. 18 weeks standard, Boas Commendus replied, before he had to be asked. Thank you, master. Our scouts have yet to examine it, but we have received word from the 140th expedition, commanded by Kitus Fromm of the Blood Angels, that opposition to Imperial advance has been encountered. Under there. Reports are patchy, but war has broken out. Human resistance? Varvarus asked. Are we talking about lost colonies? Xeno, sir, Malachus said succinctly. Alien foes of some capacity. I have sent a missive to 140th asking if they require our support at this time. It is significantly smaller than ours. No reply has yet been received. We may consider it a priority to venture forward to this region to reinforce the Imperial presence there. For the first time since this briefing began, the smile left the War Master's face. I will speak with my brother Sanguinius on this matter, he said. I would not see his men perish unsupported. He looked at Malachhurst. Thank you for this equerry. We appreciate your efforts and the brevity of your summation. There was a ripple of applause. One last thing, my lord, Malachhurst said. A personal matter I wish to clear up. I have become known, so I understand, as Malachhurst the Twisted for reasons of character that I know are not lost on any present. I have always rejoiced in the title, though some of you might think that odd. I relish the arts of politics, and make no effort to hide that. Some of my aides, as I have learned, have made efforts to have Superkit quashed, believing it offends my altered state. They worry that I might find it cruel, a slur. I want all here assembled to know that I do not. My body is broken, but my mind is not. I would take offense if the name was to be dropped out of politeness. I don't value sympathy much, and I don't want pity. I am twisted in body now, but I am still complex in mind. Don't think you are somehow sparing my feelings. I wish to be known as I always was. Well said, Abaddon cried and smacked his palms together. The assembly rose in a tumult as brisk as the one that had ushered Malachurst onto the stage. The equerry picked up his staff from the dais and, leaning upon it, turned to the War Master. Horus raised both hands to restore quiet. Our thanks to Malachurst for presenting these options to us. There is much to consider. I dissolve this briefing now, but I request policy suggestions and remarks to my attention in the next day. Ship time, I urge you all to study all possibilities and present your assignments. We will reconvene the day after tomorrow at this time. That is all. The meeting broke up as the upper galleries emptied, buzzing with chatter. The parties of the Strategium deck gathered in informal conference. The War Master stood in quiet conversation with Malachurst and the Mechanicum Adept. Nicely done, Torgon whispered to Loken. Loken breathed out. He hadn't realized what a weight of tension had built up in him since his summons to the briefing had arrived. Yes, finely put, said Aximan. I approve your commentary, Garviel. I just said what I felt. I made it up as I went along, Loken admitted. Aximan frowned at him, as if not sure whether he was joking or not. Are you not cowed by these circumstances, Horus? Loken asked. At first, I suppose, I must have been, Aximan replied in an offhand way. You get used to it, once you've been through one or two. I found it was helpful to look at his feet. His feet? The War Master's feet. Catch his eye and you'll quite forget what you were going to say. Aximan smiled slightly. It was the first hint of any softening towards Loken that little Horus had shown. Thanks, I'll remember that. Abaddon joined them under the shadow of the cover hang. I knew we picked right, he said, clasping Loken's hand in his own. Cut to the quick. That's what the War Master wants of us. A clean appraisal. Good job, Garviel. Now just make sure it's a good job. I will. Need any help? I can lend you the Justarian if you need them. Thank you, but 10th can do this. Abaddon nodded. I'll tell Fulcus and his Widowmakers are subfluous to requirements. Please don't do that. Loken snapped, alarmed at the prospect of assaulting Fulcus Kyber, captain of the first company's Terminator Elite. The other 3/4 of the Vulnerable laughed out loud. Your face! Torgon said, Ezekiel goads you so easily! Chuckled Aximan. And Ezekiel knows he will develop a tough skin soon enough. Ezekiel knows he'll develop a tough skin soon enough, Abaddon remarked. Captain Loken, Lord Governor-elect Rakis, was approaching them. Abaddon, Aximan, and Torgon stood aside to let him through. Captain Loken, and Rakis said, I just wanted to say, sir, I just wanted to say how grateful I was to take this matter upon yourself and your company, to speak out so very directly. Lord Vivarus' soldiers are trying their best, but they are just men. The regime here is doomed unless firm action is taken. 10th Company will deal with the problems, Lord Governor, Loken said. You will have my word as an Astartes. Nice. Because the army can't hack it. They looked around and found the tall, piercing figure of Lord Commander Vivarus had joined them too. I didn't mean to suggest, Rackus blurted. No offense was intended. No offense was intended, Lord Commander, said Loken. And none taken, Vivarus said, extending a hand towards Loken. An old custom of Terra, Captain Loken. Loken took his hand and shook it. One I have been reminded of lately, he said. Vivarus smiled. I want to welcome you into our inner circle, Captain, and to assure you that you did not speak out of turn today. In the south, my men are being slaughtered day in and day out. I have, I believe, the finest army in all the expedition, but I know full well it is composed of men, and just men. I understand when a fighting man is needed and when Astartes is needed. This is the latter time. Come to my war cabinet at your convenience, and I'll be happy to brief you fully. Thank you, Lord Commander. I will attend to you this afternoon. Vivarus nodded. Excuse me, Lord Commander, Torgon said. The Monorville is needed. The War Master is withdrawing, and he has called for us. The Monorville followed the War Master through the plated glass doors into his private sanctum, a wide, well-appointed chamber built below the well of the audience galleries on the port side of the flagship. One wall was glass, open to the stars. Malachus and the War Master bustled in the ahead of them, and the Monorville drew back into the shadows, waiting to be called upon. Loken stiffened as three figures descended the ironwork screw stair into the room from a gallery above. The first two were Astartes of the Imperial Fists, almost glowing in their yellow plate. The third was much larger, another god. Rogel Dorn, Primarch of the Imperial Fists, brother to Horus. Dorn greeted the War Master warmly, and went to sit with him and Malachurst upon the black leather couches facing the glass wall. Servitors brought them refreshments. Rogel was a being of great in all measure as Horus. He and his entourage of Imperial Fists had been traveling with the expedition for some months, though they were expected to take their leave soon. Other duties and expeditions called, and Loken had been there and told that Primarch Dorn had come to them at Horus's behest, so that the two of them might discuss in detail the obligations and remit of the role of the War Master. Horus had solicited the opinion and advice of all of his brother Primarchs on the subject since the honor had been bestowed upon him. Being named War Master set him abruptly apart from them, and raised him up above his brothers, and there had been some stifled objections and discontent, especially from those Primarchs who felt the title should have been theirs. The Primarchs were as prone to sibling rivalry and petty competition as any group of brothers. Guided, it was likely, by Malachurst's shrewd hand. Horus had courted his brothers, stilling fears, calming doubts, reaffirming pacts, and generally securing their cooperation. He wanted none to feel slighted or even overlooked. He wanted none to think they were no longer listened to. Some, like Sanguinius, Lorgar, and Fulgrim, had acclaimed Horus's election from the outset. Others, like Angron and Perturabo, had raged billously at the New Order and had taken masterful diplomacy on the War Master's part to placate their choler and jealousy. A few, like Russ and the Lion, had been cynically resolved, unsurprised by the turn of events. But others like Gulliman, Khan, and Dorn had simply taken it in their stride, accepting the Emperor's decree as the right and obvious choice. Horus ever had been the brightest, the first, and the favorite. They did not doubt his fitness for the role, for none of the Primarchs had ever matched Horus's achievements, nor the intimacy of his bond with the Emperor. It was to these solid, resolved brothers that Horus turned in particular for counsel. Dorn and Gulliman both embodied the staunchest and most dedicated Imperial qualities, commanding their legion expedition with peerless devotion and military genius. Horus desired their approval as a young man might seek the quiescence of the older, more accomplished brothers. Rogel Dorn possessed perhaps the finest military mind of all the Primarchs. It was as ordered and disciplined as Rogel Gulliman's, as courageous as the Lion's, yet still supple enough to allow for a flex of inspiration. The flash of battle zeal that had won the likes of Leman Russ and the Khan so many victory wreaths. Dorn's record in the crusade was second only to Horus's, but he was resolute, where Horus was flamboyant, reserved where Horus was charismatic, and that was why Horus had been the obvious choice for War Master. In keeping with his patient, stony character, Dorn's Legion had become renowned for siegecraft and defensive strategies. The War Master had once joked that where he could storm a fortress like no other, Rogel Dorn could hold it. If I had ever laid assault to a bastion possessed by you, Horus had quipped at a recent banquet, then the war would last for all of eternity. The best in attack matched by the best in defense. The Imperial fists were immovable objects of the Luna Wolves' unstoppable force. Dorn had been a quiet, observing presence in his months within the 63rd expedition, and he had spent hours in close conference with the War Master, but Loken had seen him from time to time, watching drills and studying preparations for war. Loken had not yet spoken to him or met him directly. This was the smallest place they could have been in the same time. He regarded him now, in calm discussion with the War Master, two mythical beings manifest in one room. Loken felt an honor just to be in their presence, to see them walk. The baby misses Mom. That's why she's crying out. Malachor seemed a tiny form beside them. Primarch Dorn wore a case of armor that was burnished with ornate like a tuned chest, dark red and copper gold compared to Horus's white dazzle. Unfurled eagle wings fashioned in metal hallowed his head and decorated his chest. Sarah, come on, baby. One sec. She wants me to follow her into the bathroom. What the fuck? No. 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 You can hear her, right? Okay. I have just felt the exhaustion hit me. We are at 131. I just need to find something to leave in the book. Oh my god, baby. Stop. We are at 131, chat. 131. Alright. Oh, I'm still recovering from being sick. Alright. I thank you all for coming. I thank you all for staying with this. Sarah, that's enough. She is really going at it. Alright. See you, TikTok. And chat. Thank you so much for coming. We didn't have that many people today, which sucks, but it is the start of it is the first week of September, so people are going to be busy trying to find their new schedules and stuff. If you can, please donate to the Ko-fi, and please share around the new video that came out today. I'd very much appreciate it. We are close. We are halfway to our goal. So on YouTube, essentially, we'd be at the same place where we were on Twitch when I left. So yeah, I will talk to you all